Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul, the leader of hypocrites in Medina, died. His son, whose name was also Abdullah, he was a devout and sincere Muslim who loved Allah and loved the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He requested the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to perform janazah on his father who had died. And his father was a well-known hypocrite. He was, in fact, the leader of all hypocrites. And before the migration of the Prophet ﷺ, before his arrival into Medina, he was actually getting ready to be crowned and to be elected or selected as the leader of Medina. So when Rasulullah ﷺ arrived in Medina, of course, everyone agreed on the Prophet ﷺ to be the leader. So that was taken away from him. That made him more jealous of the Prophet ﷺ than anything else. And that jealousy led him to become the founder and leader of hypocrites. And he did a lot to hurt the Prophet ﷺ when he was alive. And he did a lot to hurt Islam and the cause of Islam as well. So the Prophet ﷺ accepted the request of his son Abdullah radiallahu anhu, and he prepared to perform Salatul Janazah on Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul. So when Janazah was ready, the Prophet ﷺ came to the same spot where he would regularly perform Janazah, which was outside of Masjid al-Nabawi. There was a place called Musalla al-Janaiz, where all Janazah prayers were offered outside of Masjid al-Nabawi. So the dead body of Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul was placed right there on the same spot, and the Prophet ﷺ arrived to perform Janazah. When he was ready to start the Janazah prayer, Umar radiallahu anhu came in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and literally there was only as much distance between the Prophet ﷺ and the dead body of Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul as much distance we usually have in a saf, as much gap we have between one row and the second row. So when Umar radiallahu anhu came right in between, he stood right by the dead body of Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul, and he says to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "O Prophet of Allah, are you seriously going to do janazah on this enemy of Allah who said this, and he started mentioning all the things that Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul had done to hurt the Prophet ﷺ verbally. He said this, he said this, he said this, he said this about you, he said this about your family, he said this about Islam. Are you seriously going to do janazah on him when you know he died on hypocrisy and he died as a hypocrite?" The Prophet ﷺ started smiling. Subhanallah. May my parents be sacrificed upon the smile of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ looked at Umar radiallahu anhu and he smiled. But this was not the smile of happiness. This was the smile of bewilderment. The Prophet ﷺ is smiling at Umar radiallahu anhu that, really, you're going to object to me? But he didn't say anything. Finally, when the insistence of Umar radiallahu anhu became too much, he himself says, فَلَمَّا أَكْثَرْتُ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, when I insisted too much to the Prophet ﷺ that he shouldn't do it, the Prophet ﷺ said to me, أَخِرْنِي يَا عُمَرْ. Umar, move away. Step away. Let me do what I have to do. So Umar radiallahu anhu, again, he stepped away in obedience to the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But again, he insisted. He said, "Ya Rasulullah, no, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it." The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did the janazah. Janazah prayer was done, and he even said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, my prayer, my istighfar for him, my janazah, leading his janazah, is not going to save him. It's not going to work for him, because it's your a'mal, it's your actions that are going to come to rescue you, not someone's connection or who was your imam. Here the Prophet ﷺ is the imam of his janazah, but that's not going to save him. The Prophet ﷺ himself said, my prayer, my istighfar, my janazah, none of that is going to help him. None of that is going to save him, but I'll still do it. In another narration it is mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, I do it because I'm hopeful that when his people, those who followed him, when they see what I did for him, maybe their hearts will incline towards Islam and they will come into Islam. And according to some scholars, it is reported that after this incident, 1,000 of his followers came into Islam. He did have a large following, by the way. So 1,000 of his followers came into Islam. So after the janazah prayer was done, his body was taken to Jannatul Baqi, the cemetery in Medina. The Prophet ﷺ followed that as well, and he went to the cemetery. He went to the grave of Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul, and he stayed there just like normally he would until he was buried. And after that, the Prophet ﷺ told Umar radiallahu anhu, Umar, I was not prohibited from this. Allah gave me a choice. Allah said in Quran, Istaghfir lahum aw la tastaghfir lahum. Whether you seek forgiveness for them or you don't seek forgiveness for them, it doesn't matter. Allah will not forgive them. So Allah gave me a choice whether to seek forgiveness for such people or not, and I chose to do it. And if I had known that seeking forgiveness, because in Quran Allah said, even if you seek forgiveness for such people 70 times, Allah will not forgive them. The Prophet ﷺ said, if I knew that Allah would give them forgiveness, if I asked forgiveness more than 70 times, I would ask for forgiveness more than 70 times. This is how merciful the Prophet ﷺ was. But after the burial was done, and after everything was done, Allah revealed 2 additional verses in Quran, in same surah, in Surah At-Tawbah, in Surah Al-Bara'ah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly forbade the Prophet ﷺ from doing any prayer for such people, and from even witnessing their burial or standing on their grave. Allah said, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَحَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرٍ. Never ever you will pray on any of these people who die in this state, these munafiqeen. Anyone who dies in this state, you will never perform their janazah, and you will not even stand on their grave. وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَحَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرٍ إِنَّهُمْ كَفَرُوا بِاللَّهِ وَبِرَسُولِهِ. Because they disbelieved in Allah and in the Messenger, and they are transgressors. After that, the Prophet ﷺ never did any prayer of any munafiq. As a matter of fact, if the Prophet ﷺ was told about someone's death, he would ask, what was his name? So if his name was in the list of those who are hypocrites, the Prophet ﷺ would tell someone else to do the janazah. He wouldn't go. And the Prophet ﷺ shared the list of those names with one companion, and his name was Hudayfa bin al-Yaman radiyallahu anhu. He was the only one who had the list of those names in his memory, those who were known hypocrites to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and declared hypocrites to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in the time of Umar radiyallahu anhu, Umar radiyallahu anhu developed this habit. Umar radiyallahu anhu was very strict against hypocrites. He was a step ahead of everybody else. So when he was Amirul Mu'mineen, he developed this habit. Whenever someone's janazah was ready, he started asking Hudayfa radiyallahu anhu, is that person hypocrite? But Hudayfa radiallahu anhu would not disclose that to him because it was a secret between Hudayfa and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he would not disclose the secret of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then he thought of this idea. He would watch. If Hudayfa was in a janaza, he would go and be in that janaza. If Hudayfa was not in the janaza, Umar ibn would understand the meaning that this guy is a munafiq. So he wouldn't go in the janaza of that person. Wa akhiru da'wana. And by the way, last thing mentioned in the same hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, Umar radiallahu anhu, later, after all of this that happened, he said, لَقَدْ عَجِبْتُنِي. I wondered about myself that how I became so brave upon the Prophet ﷺ telling him not to do something. SubhanAllah, he used to regret that. But he was right. But he would still regret it later that he should not have insisted on something to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, of course, knew as well that this person was munafiq and he shouldn't be doing this, but he had another wisdom for which he was doing, which actually worked as well.